Cool. Someone's got their... Brilliant.
Okay.
So we need to put this screen. I need to share my screen.
Yeah.
Can I do that now? Share.
Oh.
I'll scooch down with you.
Sorry. Okay.
Right, so I need to share that.
Yeah.
I don't need to share the audio.
All right.
Alright, so we can still.
I need to add that to the screen. So that people see it.
Yay! So I've got to scooch down to get the camera view, Jen. Are you okay?
All right, I'm just going to do it that way. Okay. Anyway, this is funny. Hi, everyone, and hi to everyone in the room.
Everyone.
Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for those joining us online. So we're Svelte London. I'm Jen Ashley.
Hi, I'm Scott Spence, and we both help organise this meetup for everyone.
Okay, so we're gonna have 2 talks today. We're just gonna do some like a few slides.
A bit of orientation before we start.
And we'll have Geoff speaking after us, and then Chris is here with us in the room. So I guess we can start with
we start with the slides.
Yeah.
So let's go. Right. So code of conduct for all Svelte Society meetups. So if there's any issues, talk to either Jen or myself, or you can report it via the channels on that document as well. So you have to mention that. So a bit of housekeeping for everyone here, not for everyone online. Toilets just by the big brain, because we're at Brain Station today. Thank you for hosting us as well, Brain Station. Food, it's going to be happening shortly, so it'll be here. Don't worry about it. It's going to happen.
So you folks are used to what we were doing in the past, where we have the talks first and then we have food. We're going to be changing that a bit to make it the same as other meetups. We'll have the food before all the talks.
So we've got Geoff with native page transitions in SvelteKit. So this is the new browser API that's come in. Geoff's going to be talking about that. And we've got Chris, who's going to be talking about moving a team from React to Svelte. And then, if we've got time, I might be talking about doing some live refactoring of some code for the recent SvelteKit changes which have happened. But we'll see how that goes. But first up, we've got Geoff, who's going to be talking for us right now. So we should be able to hear Geoff through the speaker here. So what I'm going to need to do is mute my microphone. Bring it over here.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Right here it is.
Cool. Am I good to go, Scott? I'm going to assume that's a yes. Cool. So I'm Geoff. I'm a current member of the Svelte core team, and I recently started at Ordergroove as a senior software engineer. And today I want to talk about the page transition API and how you can use that in SvelteKit. So a little bit of background. Chrome is currently experimenting with a new API that's going to enable animated transitions from one page to another. This is a long-awaited feature in browsers. It's been possible before. You can actually get some stuff working with Svelte transitions even, but it could get pretty complicated, and there were a lot of edge cases. So lately I've been experimenting myself with how you can potentially use this API in SvelteKit, and today I'll be showing you what I've been doing, how it works, and at the end I'll be linking some resources for you to explore further. In particular, some of the resources from Jake Archibald at Google, who's been really leading this API.
Geoff?
Yeah?
Sorry, could you share your screen as well so we can see that as well, so we can see your slides?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
How's that? Can you see that okay? I'm going to assume that's good. Oh, looks like I can kind of see Scott's background. There we go. Cool. So like I was saying today, I'm going to be showing off how to use this new API in SvelteKit. And yeah, let's get going. Be advised that this API is not fully released yet. So everything I'm being showing to you is pretty experimental. And as we all know, SvelteKit is still not 1.0 yet. So anything I'm showing today could be outdated and probably will be outdated further down the line. And in particular, this API is only available in Chrome Canary behind a flag. So you can't even use it in production like you can SvelteKit. So still very experimental, very early, but still lots of fun to experiment with and play with. And just because I obsessed over this wording a little bit, this is not a SvelteKit API. It is a browser API that we can use within SvelteKit. So at the end of the talk, I'll be posting a link to my blog, linking some resources, these demos I'm showing, and all that good stuff. So this new API, how does it work? So I don't have any slides, but I'm just going to be showing some code snippets, and a lot of this is going to be some hands-on live coding. So at a high level, this is what using this API is going to look like. So let's say you have a function. This is very abstract, but you have a function that takes care of client-side navigation in a single page app like SvelteKit. You're going to call document.createDocumentTransition. That's going to create the page transition, which you can then start. And then inside this start, you're going to pass a method to it that somehow updates the DOM. So the idea is before you change from one page to another, you create a document transition. You then start it and actually change the new page. And then once this finishes, the browser will transition between those two states. So for instance, let's say we're starting here on this homepage. When I click fruits, it's going to trigger a navigation. That's when you would want to create the transition, start the transition, and then only once you've started the transition do you update the page and let the browser transition between them. And the way this actually works behind the scenes is kind of cool. So just to clear up any confusion, what I'm showing here, this is without the page transition. We're going to be adding transitions to this demo momentarily. But behind the scenes, what the browser is doing is it is taking a snapshot of the first page. And then when you go to the new page, it takes a snapshot of the new page. And then it's essentially like animating between those two images, which is a pretty cool way of implementing it. And it also enables a lot where you can actually target the old and new image in CSS, which I will be showing, and customize the animation that way. So this is all very abstract. What does this actually look like in SvelteKit? So I create a little helper here called prepare page transition. And this is a function that you're going to be calling to like set up all the navigation listeners to enable this page transition. So at a high level, what this does is it calls SvelteKit's before navigate function, which is a hook SvelteKit provides that'll let you run some code before the navigation happens. We do a check if the browser doesn't support document transitions, we're not going to do anything. But if it does, we call that create document transition, like I showed. We start the transition here, wait for the navigation to complete. And then once that happens, the transition will resolve. By that point, the new page should be showing and the browser will take care of animating between the old and the new states. This navigation complete, don't need to go too much into detail here today, but essentially this is a custom store I created that's derived from SvelteKit's navigating store. And this will essentially give us a promise that we can use so that we know when the navigation completes. So by default, the navigating store will either be the from and to that you're going to if your navigation is currently in progress, or it'll be null. And what this does is once the navigating store flips back to null, it resolves a callback, which lets us here wait for the navigation to complete. This is how we know the navigation has actually completed. So this is a little bit on the complex side, but it's not a lot of code. And this is pretty much the last time we're going to have to look at it today. So a lot of what we're going to be doing, we just call this setup, and then we can interact with the API in other ways. The other cool thing I want to call out is that we're able to just call before navigate in here. This is something I recently learned is that all the lifecycle functions in Svelte and SvelteKit, you can call them from anywhere. They don't have to be inside the component as long as where you're calling them from is called in a component eventually. So it lets us make this nice abstraction, and the consumer doesn't need to care that this calls before navigate behind the scenes. They just need to call this function to set everything up for them, and off we go. So that is a high-level overview of how this works. Again, I'll be posting the repo later if you want to poke around with it more. But now let's get to some fun stuff and see how this actually works on a real app. So the app we're going to be working on today, I prepared 2 different demos. This first one is pretty simple. There's basically a home page and a fruits page. And the fruits page shows a list of fruits. And if you click into one, it will show details about that fruit. This is based on a Google Chrome code lab they made to show off this API. So conceptually, it's not mine, but I took it and adapted it to SvelteKit and otherwise mucked around with it. So yeah, let's get started. Motion warnings apply from here on out if you're sensitive to motion. Just be advised and be aware of that. And everything I'm going to be showing today is using pretty much the latest SvelteKit. So if you're not familiar with what all the plus signs means, that's just SvelteKit's new routing structure. It has nothing to do with anything else I'm showing off today. So first off, let's start by just getting the default behavior. So how that's going to work, we have this prepare page transition function. And we're going to go to our layout, which wraps the entire page. And we're going to call this function. And remember, this is going to set up all the navigation listeners for us. And just by adding this one line to our app, we now have some nice crossfading going on. So I'm hoping this comes across on the stream, but essentially now when you navigate, it fades out the old page, fades in the new page, and it just makes everything feel a lot more smooth. So that's kind of nice, and that's just, one line of code, really like 50 lines behind the scenes, but the consumer only has to worry about one line of code. So like I mentioned before, a cool thing about this API is a lot of it is customizable with regular CSS animation. And to understand how to do that, we need to take a peek in DevTools. So bear with me. So because this uses CSS animation, you can use the default DevTools for animations. So I have that popped open here. You can do Command-Shift-P to pull it up yourself. And as I click the pause button here, the next animation is going to pause, and we can see what the DOM looks like. So let's pause here. So you can see I clicked on fruits, the URL changed, but it's still showing the old one. That's because I've paused the animation. And if you dig into the inspector here, what the API is doing is creating a top-level page transition element right here. And you can further drill down into this. And you can actually see, like I said, it's taking the outgoing image, it has that captured, it has the image coming in, and it's transitioning between them. And you can actually see in the styles, the outgoing image is doing an animation, it's fading out, and the incoming image is doing a fade in. So when I said that's the default behavior, it's just using default CSS stuff to make that happen. And because this is a CSS animation, we can actually target these elements and do stuff like this. So go to our CSS, and let's say we just want to change the duration of the animation. So I'm targeting those outgoing and incoming image pseudo elements at the top, and I'm saying, play the same animation, but let's just make the duration 5 seconds. And if I save that, now when I start a transition, it's going really slow, which, not a great user experience, but it proves the point. And that's not all. Anything you can do in CSS animation, pretty much you can do here. So let me add this snippet. So instead of doing a fade in and out, let's do a slide in and out. So I'm going to copy this in. So now for the outgoing image, we're changing the animation. So instead of that default fade in out, we're going to have it fade out and slide to the left. And the incoming image, we're going to have fade in and slide to the right. So, oh, did not save that. So now if I save this, as I do navigations, it's doing a nice slide instead. And that's all possible just with CSS and targeting these elements. So you can get pretty far just in CSS. Because I wired this up to the navigation listener, it also works for back and forward, like just using browser navigation, which is pretty nice. And because it's in CSS, you can, anything you can do in CSS. So you can do things like media queries if you want to only show an animation certain screen sizes. If you want to change out the animation for reduced motion, you can do that. So really, there's a lot of options here. All right, so the next thing, let me actually take this out because the next thing we're going to do is going to be a little more involved. Now we're back to the fade in, fade out. So what I want to do is get a more like almost app-like animation where we have this like Apple thumbnail right here, and then we have an Apple thumbnail right here. Wouldn't it be cool if we could like transition the position of this thumbnail into the position of this thumbnail? And that might be a little hard to understand what I'm talking about, but let's just get right into it. I can show you what it looks like. So the way you do that with this API is using page transition tags. So essentially you can tell the browser, this is element 1 and this is element 1, so that when we transition between two pages, take the old position of element 1 and move it into the new position of element 1, which might have been tricky to do before this API. But with this API, it's actually not so bad. So let me show you what this looks like. So really quick, I'm going to use the experimental Svelte inspector, which is part of the Vite plugin. So I want to go to this component. And I want to give this a page transition tag. So the way you do that is just in CSS. Let's say fruit. And one requirement of using page transition tag is you have to give it contain paint, which I don't entirely understand what this is, but my understanding is basically it tells the browser this section of the page is independent and it's going to help with layout optimization and transitioning and all that stuff. So we gave this icon a page transition tag. Now we want to give this the same page transition tag. So here's the image on the fruit details page. So theoretically, that's all we need. Though actually, it's not going to work, and I can show why. So right now, still doing the same thing. Right now, it's actually not even doing the crossfade. And the reason for that is if we open up the inspector in the console, it's complaining that invalid element configuration, which I don't know if it gives more details. But essentially what it's complaining about is because we set a page transition tag in this component, actually every image on the page has the same page transition tag. So the browser doesn't know which one to animate into the new position. We can get around that by, let me show you that it does work when you only have one element on the page. So if you do this, there's only one element with page transition tag fruit. So that actually does what we want, and you get that nice little slide thing, which I think is very, very pleasant from a UX perspective. But now that we have multiple, browser gets confused because it doesn't know which one. So there's a few different ways to solve this. What I'm going to start with is let's give it a dynamic page transition tag. So instead of giving these all the same fruit tag, what if we gave this one fruit apples, this one fruit strawberries, this one fruit grapes, just to uniquely identify them. And so you might think of doing something like this, like where name is a prop coming into the component. However, Svelte doesn't work like that. You can't use state variables inside your style tag directly, but what we can do is use a CSS variable. So this will create a CSS variable named tag, where the name is like fruit apples, fruit strawberries, that kind of thing. And then down here, we can use the variable. So that did it here. So now this has like fruit apples, but now we want to give this the same page transition tag. So this needs to do the exact same thing. Not working how I want, but it will. What was this file? Icon, I think. So same thing here. Now, every element on this page is going to have a unique page transition tag, so the browser is able to transition them appropriately. So this works, and this works. So that's pretty slick, and we really did not have to write all that much code. I'm enjoying the effect. You might notice it's a little bit janky at times. I'm not sure why. I think that's some sort of conflict between when the transition runs and when SvelteKit updates the DOM that I'm still ironing out, but you still get the idea. Cool, so that's the first demo. Are there, I don't know if I can even see questions, but if there's any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next one. So then this next site I'm going to show off. So I briefly mentioned some of the stuff Jake Archibald has done in creating demos around this new API. The main site he built was this, which to show off the page transition API, showing episodes of the HTTP 203 videos on YouTube. So for our purposes, I'm going to be reviewing a lot of the same territory he covered in his articles. However, the site I made is a Svelte Summit themed version of that site. So on this, we are showing all of the Summit videos. You can click in to see details on each video. You can also filter down to specific years. And like before, this works, but transitions can be a little jarring. We're just going right from one page to the other. And it would be really nice if we could have animated page transitions. So that's what we're going to do. So like before, we're going to start by going to the layout and setting up that hook. So following my prepare page transition utility. And with that, we're going to get a crossfade in one line of code, which is very nice. The one modification we're going to make to this, so I kind of glossed over this when showing the utility in the first place. Also takes in a function to get the page transition type, which this is just purely for my benefit. This is going to run when the transition does and determine what type it is, and that's going to help us run specific logic depending on where we're going from or to. So for instance, if we're going to videos and we're going from the home page, it's a thumbs to video. So that's like where you're starting here and going to the main video screen. If we're going back the other way, if we're going from videos and back to the home screen, that's a video to thumbs. But basically this runs to determine the transition type to just centralize some of that logic instead of always having to check the URL. And where that's going to be used is some transition-specific lifecycle hooks that I've added, which we will use later. Cool, so this works. We get a nice little crossfade. The first thing I want to look at here is, if you look at the header, we're showing a back icon here depending on whether we're on the home page or not, essentially. And it's a little bit jarring because like this element isn't really changing, but we're still like, it's like it's a completely new part of the page, even though it's the same part of the page. And what would be nice is if this title kind of scooted over a little bit. So like the back button shows and the title moves over. So we want the title text in the header to transition independently of the rest of the page. So the way we can do that is we can apply a page transition tag, because in addition to like transitioning elements one to the other, it's also identifying like this part of the page is separate, and like you should treat this the same as an element with the same tag on the new page. So what we're going to do is, here's the header. We're actually going to give the header its own tag, which also helps with this, and then we're going to give the text its own tag. And with that, if we save, it kind of works. So you might notice like that one slid nicely, that one slid nicely, but sometimes it actually just jumps back. So it's not working completely as we'd expect. And the reason for that is essentially a race condition. Sometimes some code is executing before the transition and sometimes is executing after. And to better understand that, let me pull this up and show you like what the ideal state is. So ideally, transition lifecycle looks something like this. So we start a navigation, the transition starts, it captures a snapshot of the page, and then the page is updated and we transition to the new state. So we want to capture the snapshot before anything on the page has changed. And what we're running into is that the page is changing before the snapshot is captured. So what's really happening, back button, position, updates, it's updating here to the new position, which means when we capture the screenshot, it's not capturing the old position of the back button, it's capturing the new one. Which means there's no difference between the first and the last screenshot, so that's why it kind of just jerks, like no transition is happening to it. So sometimes it's happening here, sometimes it's not. And the reason for that is here is where we're actually determining when to show the back button. We're basing it on the URL store, and this might update before the transition has a chance to start. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of not super consistent. So sometimes the state changes right away, and sometimes it waits to change until after the transition happens. And if it changes right away, it's not going to transition properly because it changes too soon. If it changes after the transition happens, that's when we get like the effect we want of the nice slide back and forth. So this bug was actually kind of annoying, and it took me a while to figure out what was actually going on here. And I figured out one workaround for it that I'm not super happy with, but it does make things more consistent. So let me show you what that looks like. So what we're actually going to do is, instead of making this reactive, so updating as soon as the URL store updates, we want to wait to update this until the transition is already started. And the way we can do that is by using this additional transition function I exposed called while incoming transition. And this basically queues some code to run while the transition is in progress, so that we're guaranteed that whatever we do in here, the transition is already started. We don't have to worry about this race condition we're encountering. So what this gives us, it tells us the page we're going from, similar to SvelteKit's navigation hooks, the page we're going to, as well as the type of transition, and that's what this utility function is being used for. In this case, we don't need to use the type. We will actually use that later. So instead of making this reactive on the URL store, which will update too soon, we're going to set it in here, and actually going to be very similar. We want to set show back icon based on the page we're going to. And like I said, this code is guaranteed to run once the transition is started. So by updating the state in here, we're going to be getting a smoother transition. So it's going to be a very similar check. We're just waiting to update it until the transition has started. So with that change, if I'm going back and forth, it works pretty consistently. It's not jerking anymore. The one downside of this approach is that if the browser doesn't support the transition API, we're not even going to run this code. So like if I opened up this demo on Firefox, the back icon state doesn't update at all, which isn't great. I'm still trying to figure out different workarounds around that. But for the purposes of this, and for a small piece of UI like this, it's probably fine. And this kind of workaround is really only needed for URL-derived state. So the only reason we ran into this issue is because we were basing it on page.url. And we were doing it in a component that was staying the same between one page and the other. So in other cases, we probably don't have to do this, but this is really just an edge case I encountered. Cool. So we have that all sorted. So for the final bit of this demo, I want to do a similar effect to what we did on the fruits. So animating like this embed tile into the tile on the new page. Let me actually, there we go. So in this case, it's going to be a little bit more complicated than what we did on the other case. And the reason for that, so you might think, okay, let's do the same strategy. This has like transition tag video 1, video 2, video 3. Then we dynamically set this transition tag to video 1, video 2, video 3. The issue we run into is that this is actually the same component. This list is the same component as what's out here. So if we gave this video 1, this would have tag video 1, and this would have tag video 1. And we run into a very similar issue where you have two identical tags on the page, and the browser can't transition between them. So we need to get a little more granular with this. And essentially what we're going to do is when the transition starts, we're going to figure out, okay, which image should have the transition tag. We're going to apply it right before the transition and then transition to the new page. So we're going to be setting these tags on the fly. So to start with, let's start by looking at this embed component. We know there's only going to be one of these embeds, so we can actually start by setting the transition tag here. So this is going to have the transition tag embed container. And then this is going to have the transition tag video details. Here's the video details. This is where we're showing title, time, description. So this is going to have the details. So that takes care of the embed. That one can just stay static because there's only going to be one of those on the page. But now we need to deal with this element. So what can we do there? So let's look at the component. This is in the video list component. So we have a list of videos, and as the transition starts, we want to determine, okay, which one of these videos should have the tag, set it there before the transition. So we're going to use another transition lifecycle hook that I exposed called before page transition. And just quick aside, how this actually works is it essentially takes whatever function you pass it and adds it to a list of callbacks. And then inside prepare page transition, like when we start the transition, it's going to go through each of those callbacks and call it. So when I use before page transition, it's setting a function to run here before the transition even starts. When I use while incoming transition, it's queuing here after the navigation happens before the transition finishes. And there's also going to be one we're going to see called after transition that's running like after the transition completes. So that's all that there is to those. So what do we want to do here? So let's start with one case. Let's start with going from many videos to one video. So in this case, we want to find the video that we clicked on, which is going to be the video that links to the page we're going to. We find the one that we clicked on. We're going to set the page transition tags right there before the transition starts, and then it should work. So it's a little abstract. Let me show you what that looks like in code. So first, because this video list component is being reused, I only want to run this code when we're going from many videos to one video. So that's where this type comes in. So it'll be thumbs to video. So we don't need to worry about affecting any other type of transitions on the page, like if we're going from video to video. And then what we want to do is we want to get like this image that represents the page that we're going to, and this details, and set the transition tags on those. So get image, get p, set transition tags is what we want to do. So how do we get the image? Well, one way, you could probably use a query selector. That'll work. The one thing with using query selector and Svelte components is unless you scope it, you can run into issues of accidentally getting something in a different component or a different part of the document. So instead, we're going to be using bind this, which in Svelte lets you get a reference to a particular DOM element. So what we really want to do, so let's step back really quick. So we're going to a URL like videos/slug. So that's what's going to be in 2. And we want to find which one of these links is going to that slug, because that's the one we clicked on. That's the one where we want to transition into it. So we really want to know like which image is associated with that link and which paragraph is associated with that link. So the way I'm going to do that, say let images and let details. This is an object where the key is going to be the URL of the link that's wrapping it. And the value of it is going to be the image inside that link. I'm just writing some quick JS doc types here to make compiler happy. Well, not the compiler, but my IntelliSense happy. So what we're going to do, we have the href here. This is the video we're linking to. And so this image, actually, let me do it further up just so I can keep it in view. We're going to bind this image reference into the image. We're going to bind this into the details. So what this lets us do is if we know the link we're going to, we can pull it back by putting the link and using it to look up the image in this object and the details in this object. So now we have a reference to the image in the P, and we know which URL we're going to. So we can say the image is the images to.pathname. So we get the image nested under that URL. Do the same thing. This. And then if they both exist, just to guard ourselves, we want to set them page transition tag. And we did embed container. So what this is going to do is whenever we're transitioning from this list page to the embed, before the transition starts, it's going to figure out what page we're going to. It's going to find the image inside the link going to that URL, set the page transition tags on them, and then when the transition completes, it'll see these things have the page transition tag, so does the embed we're going to, and we can transition between them. So if we save this, now we have the nice little animation going into the new position. But right now it only works one way. So what we want to do is handle the other way. And for that one, we're going to do a while incoming transition. The reason we don't want to do before is because when we're going from the embed to this page, we need to wait for the transition to start and to have this new page on the screen. And then once that new page is on the screen but hasn't been transitioned to yet, that's when we're going to do something very similar, grab the relevant image and details and set transition tags on them so that transitions between the two of them. So in this case, we only want to do the Yoda thumbs version. So we only want to, let me destructure these. We only want to run this if we're going from the video embed page back to the list of thumbnails. And in this case, we don't want to grab to because we're going to the home page. We want to get from. We want to know which video page we're transitioning from. But besides that, we can do very similar code. We're just going to be using the URL we're going from, which is the video URL, to find relevant elements to set the page transition tag on, which that was a mouthful. But with this change, now it's going back and forth. So that's neat. There is one bug, and the reason is because we didn't clean up after ourselves. So we go here, we go back. This still has the page transition tag on it. So if we try to click on another one, that transition doesn't work because we're back to the situation where this is page transition tag. When I click on this, this is getting the page transition tag, and then the browser doesn't know which one to transition to and from. So to get around that, we're going to use the last lifecycle method I exposed, and that's going to be after page transition. Once the transition completes, we want to undo what we've done in these steps. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a list, cleanup. And whenever we modify these things, we're going to add the elements to the list. And then once the page transition is completed, we're going to go through this list and and clean up, reset the page transition tag on all of these. So is it complaining that? Oh, yeah, it just doesn't know what type it is. That's fine. I know what type it is. And then we're going to clear out cleanup. So now we're not leaving any elements on the page with the wrong page transition tag. We're going to always clean them up and reset them back to what they were before. So if we try to do the bug, so if we go back to the page and click on a different one, it works. So that fixed that. Cool. So really, that's all I want to demo today. There are a few more things on the, oh gosh. Let me show you really quick what the actual one looks like. So there's a few more animations I didn't get to where like this list slides in. If you're navigating between elements, it does a little slide thing. So there's a lot more happening in the actual repo. Again, I'll link this at the end of the talk. But I think this was a quick overview of like the different kinds of things you can do with this API. And I'm really excited to see different opportunities people discover as this API gains wider use. So one final thing about animation, I gave a talk at Svelte Summit last year about this, but anytime you're doing animation, you want to be careful because some people are sensitive to lots of motion like this. So whenever you're implementing this, make sure you take reduced motion into account. And you can see different strategies to do with this, at least relating to Svelte transitions in my talk at the last summit, but just be aware of that anytime you're doing animation. So these demos I showed, there's a few limitations. For some reason, it's a little bit buggier than I'd like. Sometimes when I refresh the page, it crashes. I don't know why. Not entirely sure if that's my fault, SvelteKit's fault, or the page transition API's fault. Probably not that because I haven't seen this same thing on non-SvelteKit implementations, but let's be aware of. The animation debugging tool doesn't always work. And some things aren't as smooth as I'd like either. So there is a little bit of jankiness like I showed, whereas if you look at the main, the original demo, like there's no flickering, there's no jankiness. So definitely a few things to iron out, but I think you get the idea. There's also a caveat where my current implementation doesn't, it starts the transition before data loading has had a chance. And this is actually something the page transition explainer explicitly calls out as something you shouldn't do. Because when you start a transition, the page isn't interactive. So you want to wait to start the transition until all your data has loaded. You're not waiting, a second for your API to respond. And the current SvelteKit implementation I have, I only can hook into before the navigation event starts. So there's no way to wait for data loading to complete. There is a SvelteKit feature request to improve this and to add some lifecycle methods that occur after navigation is completed, before data loading is completed, that kind of thing. But I don't know what the roadmap is on those or how high priority they are. So that is just something to be aware of. So one final note is that you don't need this API to do this kind of stuff. So while this is really cool and fun to play with, it's Chrome Canary only right now. And there are also actually some cool demos that just use native Svelte. So for instance, this is something from Svelte maintainer Penguin. Based off a demo, I believe, by Sarah Drasner. And this isn't using the page transition API. This is just using Svelte transitions and an API or an animation library. So you can get a lot of these same effects today without this API. That being said, I'm still excited for this API and the different features it's going to unlock. And also, I think it's just been very nice to work with. You saw how much we could get done and not a lot of code. And I'm also excited that eventually it's going to solve for non-SBAs as well. So if you have a multi-page app that's completely server rendered, you can get this kind of page transition going, which is something that's currently impossible today. So that's it for me. Really quick, if you want to see any details about what I talked about, I put a page on my blog. I'll throw this in the chat, just with a link to the demo repos, some further reading, including some of like the Chrome documentation on this, which is really good. And also some of the different page transition stuff you can do in Svelte today without this API. So that's available on my website, jeffrich.net. And yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions? I don't know if I can see the YouTube chat or anything like that, but happy to answer anything that come up.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. And I was saying that there's also clapping in the room here. You probably didn't hear it because I was muted.
Thank you. Much better, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot. And we're gonna bring in Chris now, who's gonna do a talk. Are you ready? Yeah. Right. So we're gonna. I can control it from the other side. Yeah. There you go. So make sure connected with the mic and this. I'm gonna mute myself here. Okay, everyone, we're just fixing it. So Scott and Chris are busy fixing it right now. So give us a few minutes.
So you're, don't need your camera, muted. There you go. It's going through. Cool. Right, I've got it back. Thanks, everyone. Sorry.
So, hey, I'm Chris. I'm the Director of Engineering at ExtendOps. We've got a team of, we got 4 teams, 2 to 3 developers each. We've got about 6 projects that we're building in Svelte, 2 Svelte kit sites and 4 regular old Svelte. We're an outsourcing company. When I joined back in October of last year, we were around 600 employees worldwide. We're targeting 2,500 by the end of this year. So it's a rapid scaling. And that's what my business partner, David, and I were hired to help achieve. So we work for companies like HelloFresh and J.Crew doing customer experience and customer support. We've started delving into IT support and dev support as well. Doing front ends, doing custom applications. So, I'm going to start with a sidetrack. Back in June, we went to a conference in Las Vegas called Customer Care Week or Customer Contact Week. This was sort of the coming out party for the company. We hadn't tried to go out for commercial business before that. It was mostly through the network of the CEOs and people that worked with the company. You can see my business partner, David, in the middle with the jean shirt. He's the one that's responsible for this monstrosity of a event site. So you see we've got a unicorn and a bathtub for some reason. The vending machine on the right, it actually has spirit animals from Mexico called alebrijes in it. Which were a big hit. A lot of people came to get those to take home to their kids and family. There was a reason behind those. The company works very differently than other outsourcing companies. Most outsourcing companies in the U.S. have a very heavy U.S. leadership, whereas we have a lot of our leaders in the countries that we operate in, Philippines and Mexico. So you can see some of those leaders here on the stage. After that, we went to Vallarta, where one of our offices is in Mexico, for leadership meetings. This was one of our sessions for determining what the next 6 months of development looked like. It looks like this was a reporting module that we were scoping out and shaping. So one of the questions when David and I came into the company, we immediately started using Svelte. We'd already built a lot of frameworks with it. Yeah, I saw the laugh there. They knew and trusted that decision, but they asked at this meeting with everybody in the room, why did you switch to Svelte when you joined? And of course, I said developer experience. I feel very strongly that Svelte has a very good developer experience compared to other frameworks. The team was already working in React, but there had been some failed starts with a recruitment portal that they had started with. So I said developer experience. And the business people looked at me and I looked back at them. They looked at me and I realized that they didn't really know what that meant. So that's when I had a revelation. This isn't one of the business people, but that's sort of the look that I received. So in reality, the business doesn't really care about the developer experience. They, not in isolation at least, they do care about us. Yes, they're not cutthroat. What they care about are outcomes for the business and how developer experience supports those outcomes. So what I hope to talk about in this talk is the language that you need to use to make that case for switching to Svelte. If you need to make it to a CTO, if you need to make it to a CEO, I believe that I believe you should try. And you don't need to do it wholesale. You can do it in a micro front end or microservice approach. You don't have to do it all at once. We decided to. We haven't really looked back, but that's what I hope to discuss here. One of our colleagues, he's fond of saying that the business experience will never exceed the employee experience, and I think that's why we chose Svelte. Svelte supports our developer experience, and hopefully that improves the business experience for the company. But how? So I hope to give you that language that she needs to make the case for Svelte at your company. So I really like this quote from the founder of of Y Combinator, Paul Graham. And what he says in an essay on his site, holding a program in one's head, your code is your understanding of the problem you're exploring. So it's only when you have your code in your head that you really understand the problem. And I think Svelte encapsulates that. So, for example, Svelte is quite often more succinct than other frameworks. If you're trying to do the same job in another framework, you don't have to use as many lines of code. You don't have to use effect hooks, which everybody's fond of. So the conciseness, I believe, helps you solve the problems that you're trying to solve faster. And one of the reasons that it does that is because of the readability. You can parse what a new feature that you're working on or a bug that you're working on. You can understand that better, especially if you didn't write it. When you're training, so the first week that we started using Svelte, I kind of chalked that week up as a throwaway week. We weren't going to have any production code. We were going to have anything useful from it. And David and I were kind of shaping the next week, getting ready for the real features that we were working on. They started doing PRs in a day and a half with the resources that we gave them. It wasn't quite production ready, but it was close enough that by the end of the week, we moved it over the line. So that's one experience. The other one is onboarding. When we've got new people coming in who have no Svelte experience whatsoever, we don't have to give them that much time for onboarding. Our goal is to give them production features that they need to work quickly so they experience the problems they're going to come up against. I think that's the fastest way of learning. And then mutability, not mutability in the sense of the React and the functional programming paradigm, where you create a new variable, you don't change the variable. Not like that. The mutability of what you're working on completely. Svelte, because it's concise, the time that it takes for you to load the features in your head as you're working on it is greatly shortened. I would say that our lead times have reduced by about 40% with Svelte, but 95% of statistics are made up on the spot, so I'm not sure about that. Bug fixes, those also have greatly reduced, which means we're able to solve more bugs quicker. The business doesn't understand any of that. There's not a really good way of, if I tell them, oh yeah, we solved 30 bugs this week, they don't know what that means. But if I can tell them that because the lead times on this is different, it's less, I can say, we've saved 20% on your budget for the week, and they'll understand that. So you have to shift it to the business experience. How long does it taking them to see changes to what they're working in? So another reason that we chose Svelte is that it's smaller, and smaller in a lot of different ways. And these are all pretty interrelated, so I'm just going to bring them all up. In terms of speed, they're smaller. It's a smaller bundle, which is very important for us because we're working in Mexico and the Philippines, and quite often it's rural Mexico and the Philippines. The kilobytes matter, And it matters because they're bringing them up on their phones. So we have people applying to the company from their phone, which with bad internet where they live, and this makes a huge difference for them. So it also works on lower quality devices, which has been an issue in the Philippines and Mexico for people applying for this. And that means that we have more applicants. We have a bigger pool of applicants, say 10, 15% more applicants because we're reaching smaller devices without, the time till interactive. So the other thing that we can do is we can do more on the applications. So we have 9 assessments at the volume that we're hiring. And all of these assessments are different. We have a cognitive assessment that's kind of like the IQ test. And it's all images. So, we've got transitions on that, so it comes in nicely. We've got voice assessment. We've got a listening assessment. So running these more complicated assessments than just a multiple choice test has a huge benefit for our company. And they understand that. The business understands that if we can get more applicants in, that's a larger pool to choose from. And it's also providing accessibility in areas that don't necessarily get it. So, of course, there were concerns. We had them going in. What does it look like hiring for Svelte? And to be honest, I didn't know the answer to that going into it. What we found is that we don't need to look for Svelte experience specifically. Any Angular, Vue, React experience, any front-end experience is applicable, especially with our 1.5 day lead times on getting productive code. So we try to get our new developers into features and bugs as soon as possible. Maybe not the bugs, because they've got to know the history, but then training, we've got a compiled list of videos and tutorials. There are fewer, training modules out there to choose from, but I look at that as a feature, not a bug. You don't have to filter for, quality content. And most of the stuff out there is really good, including Scott's stuff. And then documentation. One of my developers, they did flag that there's less documentation, but again, I think that is a feature, not a bug. That's it. My best of luck to you. If you need help making the case to your CTO or your business for Svelte, if you need an example, feel free to contact me. Questions? Yeah, we got a question.
I was expecting you would say, if you need any help, don't ask me, because that's how the good luck was.
No.
One question.
Yeah.
Is Svelte statically typed, strong typed or like weak typed? Is it like JavaScript or TypeScript?
You can use. So yeah, the question is whether it's a statically typed language, TypeScript or JavaScript. You can use both with it. So we're using JavaScript.
So I am a person who hates TypeScript. Right? Yeah. Say a lot of people here coming from JavaScript or PHP background will hate TypeScript.
Yeah.
So for those people, is this okay?
Yeah, it's fine. So SvelteKit, some of the latest changes, they're supporting a more, it's like a JS dot TypeScript merger. So you can choose to do it if you want. We are not TypeScript, even though I've got the sticker for it. We're not TypeScript, and that's kind of legacy from, we're actually going to use something that you haven't heard about in a while, Meteor.js. We found that the real-time aspect of Meteor and the fact that we don't have to do DevOps on this, but getting Meteor, Svelte, and TypeScript to work together well, we just haven't delved into that. Meteor JS, yeah. It is still alive, yeah. It's owned by Tiny, the same owners of Dribble. So, yeah. You had a question, yeah?
Yeah, so did you find we started from a greenfield perspective. That's to say, did you have a large existing code base that was making you money?
Yeah. So the question was, did we start from a greenfield perspective? We did, yes. So there was an existing recruitment app built in TypeScript. They had 3 apps that they built before we joined in October in React, but it wasn't performant so at that time, all of the dev team was in the Philippines. It wasn't performant in Mexico, so the hiring team in Mexico wasn't using it. So we were hired, David and I were hired to quote unquote fix that. But what we needed to do was to take DevOps off of the table completely, which was part of the choice behind Meteor. But then we knew that the front end experience with React is amazing. So we'd already developed about 20 applications together in Svelte before that. So yeah.
The follow-up question being, or the implicit question being, if you had a large amount of code that was sitting there making money, that would have been a harder sell, right?
It would have been a harder sell. So the question was, if we did have an existing code base and we needed to support it, it would be a harder sell. And I agree that would be a harder sell, but you could use a micro front end approach where you're not replacing everything. So it's like microservices for the front end. So you could do it piecemeal if you needed to, especially with the size of Svelte. Coming into specific parts of the application. We did start to explore this where we would have Svelte kit sites for specific components, and we tried iframing them in, but that wasn't the cleanest solution. It's what Spotify does, I believe. So, but I don't know, did that answer your question? Or it would have been a harder sell, but I was the most technical person on the team at the time. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
How did you manage frustrations from moving from something that was like presumably working to throwing it out and starting again?
So the question was, how do we manage frustrations from something that was presumably working to starting again? We did. So it wasn't being used. So it wasn't presumably working. And there was so they had that in an AWS Singapore location. So that explains some of the difficulties with Mexico at the time. But it was still slow in the Philippines. So it wasn't working for the company. So we didn't really have to defend that. And we all know what takes one developer 1 month to do, it takes 2 developers 2 months. So David and I, we built a prototype that got it working, first. And the team wasn't really starting with Svelte and doing all the pieces. We had routing sorted because it's Meteor, it's not Svelte kit. So yeah, I mean, the frustrations, we kind of didn't have to deal with them.
So you led with a prototype?
What's that?
You led with like a working prototype?
We started with one, but there were a lot of features that needed to be added. So it had the architecture, but there was still a lot of open territory. We actually split the app. So originally there was the recruitment side had both the internal and the external parts of it. But those didn't need to scale at the same rates. We only had 15, 20 people accessing the internal part. Whereas the external part has thousands of people a month. So what we did was we separated those, and then it just accesses the same database.
Cool. Anyone else? So just while Chris is on here, I'm going to use his microphone still, so everyone on the stream can hear me. We're just tangled up in loads of wires here, trying to get everything working. So we usually have 3 speakers on, but tonight we've only had 2. I've been doing a lot of refactoring with the recent SvelteKit changes. So would anyone be interested in seeing the migration from an existing SvelteKit project over to the new Roots API? Okay, right, let's get set up. So we're just going to unplug Chris, and I'll move my laptop, which has got no battery, over here. So let's just get those out. Thanks, mate.
So we're just gonna wait for Scott to get set up. Just give us a few seconds, hopefully. He'll be there soon. Okay. Right, he's just setting up. Okay, so Scott's gonna be connecting soon. So we'll be back with you. I hope you enjoyed the first two talks. And if you've got questions, you can always ping them on Twitter. Okay. Soon, promise. We'll be back soon with Scott. He's just getting set up. Okay. Almost there, folks. There you go. All right, we're gonna add. Scott, can you connect to StreamYard? No worries. Anyway, I'm just gonna show you folks where we are. This venue is actually quite a great venue. So they are like a training company. So they do boot camps on UX and then product management as well as web development. So if anyone's interested, just check out Brain Station. I'm gonna give you a tour while we're waiting for Scott to get ready. It's quite a nice building, actually. So we're hoping that we're going to be hosted here more frequently because, as you know, we lost the old venue. All right, Scott's still setting up. So let me continue with the tour. It's a big place. There are different levels. I think there are 3 levels here right now. So okay, I think we've got Scott now. So let me add him to the stream. Okay, Scott, you're on.
Thank you, Jen. Right, so I need to share my screen. Okay, StreamYard. So I've only got one screen to share because I'm literally doing this from my editor. So let's go to my GitHub and find a project to refactor. So with the new SvelteKit changes which have happened recently, let's find this. If you're familiar with SvelteKit, you'd have seen this discussion from Rich Harris over on the SvelteKit.js GitHub repository. And this is just going over all of the changes which are now live. So anyone who's creating a new SvelteKit project with NPM in its Svelte will have these new changes in effect already. But for people who have already got projects in production, even though SvelteKit is in beta, a lot of people are using it in production. These changes will break things. So this is I did a live stream on this the other day, but this is a project which isn't too complex. This is just going to be roots and the load function from a SvelteKit project. So let's just clone this. Actually, let's just see if I've got it locally first. Why is that? Terminal. Right, let's pop open terminal. So this is just a clone I did of a website for a podcast, hosting all the things, and it's got several routes in here. So you can click on each one of these here, and this is, I'm guessing, a blog post. They also do a podcast, which is what they're most known for. So there's just several routes in here. Each one of these routes has got its own load function. So let's just go. I think I've already got it on my machine. It doesn't look like I have, so let's clone it. So we have to, wow, the Wi-Fi is good here. Right, so let's change to this repo. And let's take a quick look at this now as it is. And I'm going to need to bump up the font size. Everyone can see that okay? So this is the pre-last release sort of roots folder structure, where you'd have like an index file for your main index file. You'd just have index.svelte. With the new changes that come in, there's been like plus annotation to each file. So let's just see if I can install these dependencies and see if this is going to run as it is. And I'm also going to need to get the environment variable file as well. So that's from Vercel, so I'm going to need to link that. And yep, that's me. Yep, link it. And PC, just pull the environment file just so I can run it locally. And let's see if I can run this now. That seems to work fine. Let's go over to the browser. Actually, let's open it in a browser window. All right, looks good. So let's say we are using the new hotness in SvelteKit. So cancel that. Right. Delete all the local files, and actually, let's just go over to some pull requests here I've got on this. I use Renovate, and you can see I've got some failing dependencies here. I've got one for GraphQL, and this is failing. So if we just go over to Vercel here, which is what's building it, and we go over to the build log, and then we hunt around in here for this discussion, which I just showed, which is this one here. So this is basically saying it's not working because of the recent changes. Can I copy this? I'm such a mouse and keyboard user. I don't use the laptop at all. So if you go here, we've just got the migration guide. So if you look at this very first one, we've got npx svelte migrate roots. So this is just going to help us rename the files in this project. So if you go here at the moment, we've got an index file for each one of these folders. If I go over to my terminal now and do npx svelte migrate, I've already got it in my terminal here. So let's just do svelte migrate for the roots. Say yes to proceed. And I need to install dependencies. that to work. So we're going to watch me install dependencies for a bit. Okay, now we're going to try and check out the routes again here. So if I just move this over to the side here, and can I expand this a bit? No, I can't. Right, so we're just going to watch this, rename these routes for us. So I'm going to say yes to this. And now we've got the new notation for all of the routes here. So excuse the window mess. Right, let's make this a bit bigger. So if we just take a quick look through these now, we'll notice that the contact page is it's been removed. The index.svelte has been moved, and it's now got a page.svelte. And this is how it identifies between if there's a load function for the page, which this one did have here for the slugs. This is all now being moved over to a page.js file. So this is a JS project. It makes some people in here happy. But if you also go back to this page.svelte file here, and you see all this stuff commented out, but basically it's going to throw an error on everything. So if we just try and, what's my terminal? Let's just make that full size. We try to run dev server again. Oh, it's going to throw an error for us for basically all of the routes which we're looking to display either a page, well, basically a page for. So what I'm going to do is just quickly go through each one of these pages and migrate them from this load function, which is here. Where is it? It's been commented out. This load function has now moved from the page, which would be like index.svelte. It's now being moved over to the page.js file here. So you see a lot of stuff is grayed out here because it's not being used. So there's also with the props that have been returned from the new page.js or server.js, there's no need to call it props. We're just going to return the actual data we need here. So we hit save on that. I use I auto remove imports which aren't being used, so that's why that all jumped about a bit there. So we're just returning the posts and the podcasts on the index page here. And now this context module isn't being used anymore. I am using all of these imports though. So let's just grab all of these from here. And can I just move them down? Maybe I should just cut and paste. Let's just cut and paste them. And put these into the script tag for the page. Just paste these in here and uncomment them. Right, so this is all the imports this page is going to need for the components, and the GraphQL queries aren't being used because they're in the page.js file. All of this load function now, we can get rid of this, and this is quite tricky on a laptop trackpad. Okay, so if I hit save now, and Pretty is going to do its thing and reorganize all that for me. I've got still the posts and podcasts here, which are meant to come in from this page.js file. They don't come in as named props anymore. These just come in as data. And then I can get, what was it called? Posts and podcasts from the data object here. So let's just make this a let. And we want posts. And we want to destructure those from the data prop being passed in. Right, so that should be it for that page. So let's YOLO, let's just try restart the dev server again and go over to the browser. Yay, so we've got our page gone. So now I'm still going to get 500s on all of the other routes in here because they've not been migrated over. But that's pretty much it for this exercise because it's just a page load function for each one of the routes that are in here. So all of these files have been renamed now, and Svelte's got no problems with these. It's just when there is running this code mod or migration script, it will just rename each one of your script context modules. It'll add in this, throw an error for you, and just give you a migration task to go through. So I could go through the other, what was it, 3 routes here and just redo these again, or I could do a quick Q&A. Either's fine with me, but it doesn't take long to do it, just for the pages. I have done some migrations on getting stuff from a server endpoint, a get or a put endpoint, and it's very similar. Everything is detailed in this. I don't think it's detailed in here. It's detailed in this migration guide here. So anything which you come up against, or anything which I've come up against in doing this refactoring, is undoubtedly mentioned in this very well detailed discussion over on the Svelte GitHub repo. So, should I do the rest, or do you want to do a Q&A? I could do either. I mean, it's just a case of moving these imports here. We don't need this error mode anymore. This error warning. We can uncomment these comments here. Delete out that load function there because it's been moved over to the plus.page.js file here. Can save this. So this is returning podcasts. So in here, rather than have, what am I doing here? I've somehow, this load function's in here somehow. Hang on. Oh yeah, I copied it from here. Right, there we go. All right, so get rid of all that. Get rid of that message. Paste in the imports we need. Uncomment that. So this is now going to take in data, and then we want to destructure the podcasts from data. And thank you, GitHub Copilot. So I can save that. So now if I go to the podcasts on, where was it here? No, here. Right, so podcasts, it should be live now. Okay, so we're good for that. So what else have we got to do? Actually clicking on the podcast is just going to give us another 500. So that is in the slug here. And again, we're just going to have the load function from the pre-existing setup. So if we take our imports here, loads out, get rid of this context module, we're not needing it anymore, and paste those in here, uncomment them, and we're not having podcast anymore, we're having data from page endpoint, and we're just getting podcasts this time, Copilot. But thank you all the same. So, what's this complaining about? Podcast is not defined. Podcast. There we go, right. So over in the page.js file, we can just save this and clean up those imports. So now if we go back over to here, we've got our podcast page, and that's it really. We've just got the contact page. There's no changes to that because it didn't have a load function. So that's it. Questions? No? Right. That's it then. Thanks everyone. Jen, do you want to wrap up?
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you at the next meetup. We'll publish this. It's on YouTube already, so people can catch up. Any questions from the room for Scott? Don't think so.
Any questions, anyone?
We're gonna wrap up. So thanks again, everyone, for joining.
What is the what? Sorry. The font. Yes, of course. The font is Victor Mono, and it's been my go-to font for ages.